The rain was coming down hard, turning the city streets into mirrors reflecting the neon signs and headlights. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels like it's holding its breath. Dr. Alistair Thorne sat behind the wheel of his sedan, parked in the dimly lit lot of a 24-hour diner. He wasn't on the clock, not officially. But for a surgeon, being off the clock was just a polite fiction. He had just finished a 14-hour shift at the trauma center, and his body felt like it had been unplugged from the wall. His eyes burned, and his hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he reached for a lukewarm coffee in the cup holder. He needed this moment. Just 5 minutes of silence before he drove home to sleep for 3 hours and did it all again. He leaned his head back against the headrest, closing his eyes for just a second. He listened to the rhythmic thrum of the rain against the metal roof. It was the only peace he got these days. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a phone ring. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz from his pager, the device that ruled his life. Alistair flinched, his heart instantly hammering against his ribs. He knew that buzz. It wasn't the standard "we have a question" page. It was the emergency tone. The one they used when everything was going wrong and the world was falling apart. He grabbed the small, plastic square from his belt. The screen glowed harsh in the dark car. Code black. Trauma 1. Immediate response required.
Alistair didn't sigh.
He didn't complain. He didn't allow himself the luxury of being human for a second longer. He shoved the coffee into the holder, threw the car into gear, and peeled out of the parking lot. The tires squealed on the wet pavement, gripping for traction as he accelerated onto the main road. His mind was already shifting gears, shedding the exhaustion of the last 14 hours and replacing it with the cold. Sharp focus required to keep people alive. He pressed the button on his steering wheel, his hands tightening around the leather. "Call trauma center," he commanded, his voice raspy. The phone rang twice before a frantic voice picked up. "Dr. Thorne? Thank God. It's Dr. Evans in the ER. We need you here now." "What's the story?" Alistair asked, his eyes scanning the road, looking for gaps in traffic. He flipped on his dashboard, lit a small, flashing blue light that identified him as a medical professional responding to an emergency. It wasn't a siren, but in this city, people usually knew to move over. Pez trauma. 6-year-old male. MV, a motor vehicle accident. The car was T-boned at an intersection. The boy was in the back seat, no restraint. He took a massive impact to the left side. Alistair felt that familiar knot form in his stomach. Pediatric traumas were the worst. The bodies were so small, so fragile. Internal injuries? Extensive, Evans said, and Alistair could hear the beep of monitors and the shouting of nurses in the background. "He's hypotensive, barely holding a BP. We did a fast exam, and his belly is full of blood. We think it's a hepatic laceration, maybe a splenic rupture, but the CT scan showed something else. There's a tear in the inferior vena cava." Alistair slammed on the brakes as a truck drifted into his lane, then swerved around it. "Did you say IVC?" "That's a death sentence, Evans." "I know." The voice on the other end was tight with panic. "The vascular team is scrubbed in, but they're saying the tear is too high, too close to the heart. They're hesitating. They don't want to open him up because they don't think they can clamp it without losing him." "He's fading fast, Alistair. His O2 stats are dropping. He needs the repair, and he needs it now. Is anyone else available?" "Dr. Vance. He's in surgery with a triple bypass. You're the only one with the experience for this kind of vascular repair in a PACE patient. You did that miracle save last year with the little girl. You're the only one who can save this boy." Alistair gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. The rain was coming down harder now, the wipers working furiously to clear the glass. He could see the distant glow of the hospital lights in the skyline, but it felt miles away. He wasn't just a driver anymore. He was the lifeline. "I'm 10 minutes out," Alistair said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming that calm. Authoritative commander that took over in the OR. "Keep him stable. Push fluids. Get type O negative on the rapid infuser. And tell the vascular team to stop hesitating. I'm going to walk in there, and we're going to fix this." "Please hurry," Evans whispered. He's a beautiful kid, Alistair. He's got a whole family in the waiting room. They're praying. They can keep praying, Alistair said. I'm coming to do the work. He hung up the phone. The car felt smaller, the rain louder. He pushed the speedometer higher, weaving carefully but urgently through the late-night traffic. His mind raced through the anatomy. The inferior vena cava is the large vein that carries blood from the lower body back to the heart. A tear there means you are bleeding out internally, filling your own chest and abdomen with your life force. Fixing it is like trying to sew wet tissue paper while someone is pouring water on it. And doing it on a 6-year-old? The margin for error was 0. One slip, one missed suture, and the child was gone. He thought about the family waiting. He could picture them without even seeing them. The mother pacing, the father staring at the floor, the grandparents holding on to each other. He knew that walk. He knew that hallway. He had been the one to walk out and tell them the good news, and he had been the one to deliver the bad news. The bad news never got easier. It stayed with you, haunting the quiet. Moments like the one he had in the diner just 10 minutes ago. He wasn't going to deliver bad news tonight. Not if he could help it. The traffic light ahead turned red. It was a long one. Alistair checked the intersection. It was clear. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the rule follower in him warring with the savior. The savior one. He eased the car through the red light, flashing his blue light, hoping any cross-traffic would see the urgency. He was driving a sleek silver sedan, a respectable car for a man of his standing. He was dressed in dark slacks and a crisp button-down shirt, having taken off his tie and jacket hours ago. To anyone looking, he was just another guy in a nice car driving a bit too fast in the rain. But underneath the clothes, under the skin, he was a machine built for one purpose. The city blocks blurred by. The hospital was closer now. He could see the helicopter pad on the roof, the red aviation warning light blinking against the storm clouds. 5 minutes. He could make it in 5 minutes if the lights stayed with him. But then he saw them in his rearview mirror. Red and blue lights erupted, cutting through the rain. They were bright, intense, and flashing rapidly. A siren wailed, a short, sharp burst that signaled a command to pull over. Alistair's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the mirror again. A patrol car was directly behind him, riding his bumper. "Ah, come on," he muttered to himself. Not now. Not tonight. He checked his speed. He was doing 15 over the limit. He had run a red light. He knew why they were pulling him over. He knew the protocol, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to keep going. The boy was dying. The clock was ticking. Every second he spent on the side of the road was a second the child's blood pressure dropped closer to 0. He thought about just speeding up. He could outrun them maybe, make it to the bay where security would wave him in. But he was a black man, driving a nice car in a city with a history of tension between the community and the police. The thought of leading them on a chase, of being seen as a fleeing suspect, terrified him. He wasn't a criminal. He was a surgeon. But he knew that sometimes the uniform didn't matter as much as the skin color. He slowed down, signaling to pull over to the right shoulder. He felt a surge of frustration, hot and bitter. He grabbed his hospital ID badge from the passenger seat where he had tossed it. He held it in his hand, pressing his thumb against the photo ID, as if that plastic card could shield him from what was about to happen. The car came to a stop on the wet pavement. The puddles on the side of the road were deep. He kept his hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position, exactly like you were supposed to do. He rolled down the window, letting in the cold, damp air and the sound of the rain. He watched in the mirror as 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. They had their hats low against the rain. One of them moved to the driver's side. The other stayed back near the B-pillar, hand resting near his belt. Alistair took a deep breath. He wasn't angry. He was just desperate. He needed them to understand. He needed them to let him go. He rehearsed the words in his head. Asterisk officer, I am a surgeon responding to a code black at the hospital. A child is dying. Please, let me go. Look at my ID. Asterisk. He tried to make his face look calm, professional, non-threatening. He knew how to do this. He had spent his life navigating spaces where he wasn't expected, where he had to be twice as good and half as angry just to survive. He channeled all of that into the way he sat in the driver's seat, shoulders relaxed, posture open, hands visible, driver's license and registration. The officer's voice came through the open window. Clipped and loud over the sound of the rain, the officer shone a flashlight directly into Alistair's face, blinding him. He squinted against the glare, raising a hand slightly to block the light. "Officer, please listen," Alistair started, his voice steady but urgent. He kept his left hand on the wheel and held up his hospital ID with his right hand, leaning forward slightly so the light could catch the logo on the badge. "I am Dr. Alistair Thorne. I am a trauma surgeon at City General. I have an emergency page. A 6-year-old boy is on the table right now with a severed vena cava. I am the only one who can operate on him." The officer didn't even look at the badge. He just looked at Alistair's hand coming up. "Put your hands back on the wheel," the officer shouted, stepping closer, his voice rising an octave. "Sir, I am just showing you my ID," Alistair said, his heart rate spiking. He placed the badge on the dashboard, slowly returning his hand to the steering wheel. "The boy is dying. If I don't get there in 5 minutes, he dies. You can call the hospital. Call the operator. Ask for Dr. Evans. I said keep your hands on the wheel." The officer yelled again. The flashlight was still in his eyes, disorienting him. "Step out of the vehicle." Alistair froze. The world seemed to tilt. "Officer, I am not resisting. I am a doctor. I am trying to save a life. Step out of the vehicle now. Get your hands where I can see them." The second officer had moved up to the window, shouting over his partner. Alistair looked at the clock on the dashboard. 11:42 p.m. He needed to be in the operating room by 11:45. Every second that ticked by was a drop of blood that the little boy couldn't afford to lose. He felt a scream building in his chest, a scream of pure frustration and helplessness. He was a man of science, a man of logic. But this situation defied all logic. He slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, the click echoing loudly in the tense air. He pushed the door open, stepping out into the pouring rain. The water soaked his shirt instantly, plastering it to his skin. He raised his hands high above his head, rain streaming down his face. "I am cooperating," Alistair said, his voice trembling now, not from fear, but from the sheer, agonizing weight of the moment. "Please, just call the hospital." But the officers weren't listening. They were moving on muscle memory and training, their adrenaline high, their perception locked on a threat. They didn't see a surgeon. They didn't see a man rushing to save a child. They saw a black man who had been speeding, who hadn't followed orders instantly, who was now out of the car. "Turn around and face the car," the lead officer commanded, hand on his holster. "Put your hands on the roof." Alistair hesitated for a split second. He looked toward the hospital towers in the distance. He could see the helipad lights blinking. The boy was there. He was so close. He turned back to the officer, rain blurring his vision. "Sir, I am begging you. There is a child dying. Do it now." The officer screamed. Alistair turned slowly and placed his hands on the wet roof of his car. The metal was cold against his palms. He bowed his head, closing his eyes as he felt the officer grab his wrist and pull it behind his back. He felt the cold metal of the handcuff click shut around his wrist, tight and unyielding. Then the other wrist. He stood there, handcuffed in the rain, a doctor under arrest. While 10 minutes away, a little boy took his last breath. The irony was suffocating. The tragedy had already begun. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Dr. Alistair Thorne's wrists, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fire burning in his chest. He stood bent slightly over the hood of his sedan, the rain plastering his white shirt to his skin, making him shiver. The water ran down his face and dripped off his nose, mixing with the sweat of pure panic. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid of the clock ticking away in his head behind him. Could hear the two officers talking in low, urgent tones into their shoulder radios. Words like suspect, resisting, and disorderly floated through the air. It felt like a surreal nightmare. Alistair tried to take a deep breath to steady himself, but the air was thick and wet. Officer, Alistair said, turning his head slightly, trying to keep his voice level despite the chaos in his mind. Please, my phone. It's in my right pocket. That is the hospital calling me. They need me to tell them how to keep the boy alive until I get there. Just take it out. Answer it, please. One of the officers stepped forward, a heavy-set man with a rain hat pulled low. He grabbed Alistair by the shoulder and shoved him back against the wet metal of the car. I told you to be quiet. The officer shouted, his face inches from Alistair's. Stop talking. Stop moving. You are under arrest. Do you understand that? You are under arrest. I understand, Alistair said, his voice cracking. But the child. The child has a torn IVC. If I don't get there, he stopped, realizing that medical terms weren't going to pierce the wall of authority in front of him. He is 6 years old. He is dying. I am the only one who can save him. The officer laughed, a harsh, cynical sound. Yeah, right. Every person I arrest has some excuse. My mom is dying. My dog is sick. I'm a doctor. Save it for the judge. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic ringtone cut through the sound of the rain and the idling engines. It was Alistair's cell phone. It was sitting in his right pants pocket, buzzing against his leg. The sound was maddeningly loud in the quiet tension of the roadside. It was the ER again. It was Evans. They were calling to say the boy was crashing. They were calling for orders. Alistair couldn't stop himself. He knew better, but the instinct to save a life was stronger than the fear of the handcuffs. He pushed himself off the car slightly, turning his hips so the pocket was visible. Answer it. Alistair cried out, Please. That's the trauma center. They need to tell me the stats. Just slide your hand in my pocket and press the green button. The move was a mistake. A fatal error in communication. The other officer, the one who had been standing by the passenger door, saw Alistair twist and move his hands. From his perspective, a handcuffed man was suddenly getting restless, trying to break free, maybe reaching for a weapon. Don't move. The second officer screamed, rushing forward. I'm not reaching for a weapon. Alistair yelled back, desperation clawing at his throat. I'm reaching for the phone. I'm a doctor. Before he could finish the sentence, the officers were on him. The heavy-set officer grabbed him by the back of the neck and slammed him down onto the hood of the car. Hard. Alistair's face smashed against the cold, wet metal, his cheek scraping against the paint. A gasp was forced out of his lungs. Stop resisting. Stop resisting. They shouted in unison. I am not resisting. Alistair gasped, his breath fogging up the car's paint. I am trying to help a patient. They wrenched his arms higher up his back, sending a sharp jolt of pain through his shoulders. His surgical hands worth millions, hands capable of sewing veins the size of a hair were being treated like weapons. He felt a knee drive into the back of his thigh, forcing his legs apart. The phone was still ringing. Ring, ring, ring. It sounded like a heartbeat slowing down. A few cars had slowed down on the opposite side of the road. Drivers were watching. In the age of smartphones, it didn't take long for people to start recording. Through the rain, Alistair could see the glow of screens from the passing cars. He felt a deep wave of humiliation. He had spent years studying, years working double shifts, years proving himself in the old boys' club of surgery. And now he was just another viral video in the making. Another black man being manhandled by the police. But the humiliation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence in his head, where the surgical plan should be. He was losing focus. He was forgetting the anatomy. The panic was setting in, clouding the brilliance that made him a top surgeon. Check his pockets, one officer barked. He said he has a phone. See if there's a weapon. The officer patted him down roughly. He found the phone and pulled it out. The screen was lighting up the dark, rainy night. The caller ID read, Hospital ER Main. Alistair tried to lift his head. That's them, he choked out. That's the hospital. Answer it. Please, just answer it. The officer looked at the screen. He paused for a fraction of a second. The doubt flickered in his eyes just for a moment. He saw the hospital logo. He saw the name of the caller. But then, the ringtone stopped. The call had gone to voicemail. The moment of hesitation passed, replaced by the stubborn need to be in control. "We'll sort this out at the station," the officer grumbled. He shoved the phone into his own pocket as evidence. Or maybe just out of spite. "No." Alistair screamed, a raw, guttural sound. "You can't take that. They will call back. They need to tell me about the fluids. They need to tell me about the pressure." "Shut up." The officer shouted, tightening the cuffs another notch. "Get him in the car now." They dragged Alistair toward the back of the patrol car. His legs felt heavy, like lead weights. He looked at his own car, parked awkwardly at the curb. The blue dashboard light was still flashing, useless and ignored. It felt like a mocking symbol of his good intentions. He looked down the street toward the hospital. The towers were lit up against the black sky. He could see the red aviation lights on the roof. It was only 2 miles away. In an ambulance, with sirens, it took 5 minutes. In normal traffic, 10. He had been stopped here for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it had only been a few minutes. Still, in trauma surgery, minutes were lifetimes. He thought about the little boy. He imagined the boy lying on the table, his small chest cut open. The doctors frantically suctioning blood, waiting for the specialist. "Where is Dr. Thorne?" they would be asking. He should be here by now. Alistair's heart broke a little more with every step he took toward the police cruiser. "Please," he whispered, not shouting anymore, just speaking to the universe. "Please let me go." They shoved him into the back seat of the patrol car. It was a cramped, plastic cage. The smell of stale coffee and old sweat filled his nose. There was a metal mesh barrier separating him from the front. He landed hard on the seat, his hands still cuffed painfully behind his back. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, locking him in. Through the wet glass of the window, he watched the officers walk back toward his car. They were looking in the windows, writing down notes. One of them picked up Alistair's medical bag from the passenger seat. Alistair always kept it with him, a black leather bag containing his stethoscope, his trauma shears, and a few basic supplies. The officer opened it, dumped the contents out onto the wet seat, then tossed the empty bag onto the floorboard. Alistair pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the world outside. Inside his head, he started to do the math again. The inferior vena cava carries about 2 liters of blood per minute. If it's severed, that blood is dumping into the belly. A 6-year-old only has about 2 liters of total blood volume. That means without a clamp. The boy would bleed out in a minute or two. He wasn't bleeding out because the boy's body was trying to clamp it down with muscle spasm and pressure. And because the ER team was giving him massive amounts of blood transfusions to keep the pressure up, it was a temporary holding pattern, a high-wire act. And Alistair was the safety net they were waiting for, but the safety net was currently handcuffed in the back of a police car. Watching a cop root through his belongings, the phone in the officer's pocket buzzed again. Alistair saw the officer's pocket light up. He saw the officer pause, pull the phone out, and look at the screen. Again, it was the hospital. The officer looked toward the patrol car, a frown on his face. He said something to his partner. His partner shrugged. They were confused. They knew something was off, but they were too deep into the arrest now to back down easily. Ego was a dangerous drug, just as dangerous as time. Alistair closed his eyes. He couldn't watch anymore. He couldn't watch the seconds ticking away while he sat helpless. He retreated into his mind, visualizing the operating room. He pictured the instruments on the table, the forceps, the clamps, the suture. He pictured the anatomy, the liver, the kidney, the vein. "I'm coming," he whispered into the dark silence of the back seat. "I'm coming. Just hold on." But deep down, a cold, terrifying voice whispered back, "You might not make it. You might be too late." The rain drummed against the roof of the car, like a countdown drum that was speeding up faster and faster, driving him toward a tragedy he could see, but was powerless to stop. Asterisk. The rain kept hammering against the roof of the patrol car. a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in Dr. Alistair Thorne's chest. Inside the cramped back seat, the air was heavy and smelled of stale vinyl and fear. Alistair shifted his weight, trying to find a position that didn't send jolts of pain through his shoulders, but the handcuffs were too tight. Every time he moved, the metal chewed into his skin. Outside, the scene on the street was getting ugly. What started as a routine traffic stop had turned into a spectacle. The blue lights of the police cruisers spun wildly, casting long, dancing shadows across the wet pavement. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, people coming out of the nearby 24-hour diner. Taxi drivers, pulling over to see what was happening, and a group of teenagers holding up their phones, recording everything. "Let him go." A woman's voice shouted from the sidewalk. "He's a doctor. Can't you see his scrubs?" Alistair could hear the anger rising in the crowd. It was a volatile mix of concern and outrage. He pressed his face against the mesh partition separating him from the front seat, desperate to be heard. "Officer," Alistair said, his voice raspy but loud, "the crowd is getting restless. Please, just make the call. Verify who I am. This is only going to get worse for everyone if we stay here." The officer in the driver's seat, a younger man with a tight jawline, glanced in the rearview mirror. He looked annoyed, not worried. He picked up the radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit for Alpha. We have a situation developing at the corner of 5th and Grand, requesting immediate backup for crowd control. We have a hostile group forming." Alistair's heart sank. Backup meant more cars. More cars meant more chaos. It meant more time wasted while the little boy on the operating table drifted closer to death. He felt like he was watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to scream loud enough to stop it. "You're making a mistake," Alistair said, the frustration boiling over. He couldn't just sit there and be polite anymore. A life was slipping away. "That hostile group is trying to tell you the truth. I am a surgeon at City General. I have a patient who is dying. Turn around and face the window." The officer barked, slamming the radio handset back into its cradle. "Stop talking." The second officer, the one who had thrown Alistair to the ground, was standing outside the car now. He was talking to the growing crowd, his hand resting on his baton, trying to push them back. "Step back. Stay behind the yellow line. This is official police business. He wasn't doing anything wrong." A man in a hoodie yelled back. "He was just trying to get to the hospital." The officer's face reddened. He looked like a man who hated being challenged, especially in public. He turned back to the patrol car, marched over to Alistair's window, and yanked the door open. "You think this is a joke?" The officer snarled, leaning in close. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto Alistair's face. "You think you can send your friends out here to intimidate us?" "I don't know these people," Alistair said, looking the officer in the eye. He didn't flinch. "I am a man trying to save a child. You are stopping me. History will not look kindly on this, and neither will your conscience if that boy dies." The officer stared at him for a long moment. For a second, the mask of authority slipped, and Alistair saw a flicker of doubt in the man's eyes. But then the ego flared up again. The officer couldn't back down now. Not in front of the crowd. Not after he had already put the handcuffs on. "Get comfortable," the officer sneered, slamming the door shut again. "You're going nowhere." He walked back to the front of the car and leaned in through the passenger window to speak to his partner. Alistair watched them through the mesh. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the body language. They were closing ranks. They were digging in. Suddenly, the phone that the younger officer had shoved into his pocket started buzzing again. It buzzed aggressively against the plastic of the door panel. The officer ignored it. Alistair closed his eyes. He thought about the little boy. He imagined the heart monitor beeping slower and slower. He imagined the blood draining away, turning cold. He had failed patients before. It was the terrible burden of being a surgeon. But he had never failed because he was handcuffed on the side of the road. This was a different kind of pain. It was a helpless, grinding agony. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the air. 2 more patrol cars screeched up to the scene, their lights adding to the chaotic disco of red and blue. The crowd grew larger, sensing the escalation. People were shouting now, chanting. The atmosphere was electric, dangerous. Alistair watched as a sergeant, a man with silver hair and stripes on his sleeve, walked over to the two officers. They spoke in hushed tones. The sergeant looked at Alistair's car, then at the crowd, then back at the officers. He didn't look happy. Inside the car, the radio crackled to life. It wasn't dispatch this time. It was a different channel patched through. "Attention all units in the vicinity of 5th and Grand." A woman's voice came through the speaker, calm but commanding. "Be advised. City General Hospital Administration is on line 1. They are reporting a missing trauma surgeon, Dr. Alistair Thorne. They state he's responding to a critical emergency. Repeat, the hospital is requesting immediate confirmation of the surgeon's location." The car went silent. The driver froze, his hand hovering over the gear shift. The radio hung in the air, the echo of the words fading away. The driver looked at his partner. The partner looked at the sergeant. The sergeant looked into the back seat of the car, right at Alistair. For the first time, Alistair saw the realization dawn on their faces. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. The driver reached into his pocket and finally pulled out the buzzing phone. He looked at the screen. Another call was coming in. The name on the screen read, "Chief of Surgery." The officer swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet car. He looked back at Alistair, and for the first time he didn't see a suspect. He saw a man he had made a terrible mistake with. The escalation had reached its peak, and now the only way left to go was down. But for Alistair, the damage was already done. The time was gone. The boy was alone. The silence inside the patrol car was heavy, pressing down on everyone like the wet air outside. The younger officer in the driver's seat stared at the phone in his hand, the screen still glowing with the call log from the hospital. His partner, who had been so aggressive just moments before, stood by the hood of the car looking around at the crowd that was now shouting even louder. They sensed the shift. They knew the officers were hesitating. The driver swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet. He looked into the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Alistair's for the first time without a shield of suspicion. There was fear in those eyes now. Not the fear of a criminal, but the fear of a man who realizes he has made a terrible, irreversible mistake. "Dr. Thorne," the driver said, his voice quiet, almost respectful. I'm going to answer this. I'm going to put it on speaker." Alistair didn't nod. He just kept his eyes forward, his jaw set tight. "Do it," he said. The officer pressed the green button. "Hello? This is Officer?" "This is Unit 4 Alpha. Where is he?" A voice exploded from the phone speaker. It was the Chief of Surgery, a man Alistair had known for 20 years. He sounded frantic, a tone Alistair had never heard him use. "I have a 6-year-old boy crashing in the OR. Dr. Thorne was supposed to be there 10 minutes ago. We are tracking his phone, and it shows he's sitting on 5th and Grand. Tell me my surgeon is under arrest." The officer flinched like he'd been physically struck. "Sir, we stopped him for a traffic violation. He was driving erratically. He didn't have a siren, just a dashboard light. We didn't know." "I don't care what you didn't know," the chief screamed. "He is the only vascular surgeon in the city who can save that boy. If that child dies because you held him up, I will have your badge and the entire department on the news tonight. Is he there? Is he okay?" "I'm here," Alistair said, his voice cutting through the small space. "I'm in the back of the car. I'm in handcuffs." "Officer," the chief's voice dropped to a low, deadly calm. "Uncuff him. Give him back his keys. If you don't, and I have to send another surgeon who can't do the procedure, that death is on you. Do you understand me? Uncuff him now." The officer didn't wait for his sergeant. He didn't wait for protocol. He threw the car door open and ran around to the back seat. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them in the wet gravel. He cursed, scrambling to pick them up. The crowd jeered, watching the frantic dance. When the door finally opened, the cold air rushed in. The officer leaned in, the beam of his flashlight catching Alistair's wrists. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say it was a mistake. He just unlocked the metal bracelets the moment the springs clicked open. Pressure vanished. replaced by a stinging rush of blood flow. Alistair pulled his arms forward, rubbing the raw red skin. He looked at his hands. They were swollen, the joints stiff. He flexed his fingers, making a fist, then opening it. He needed the dexterity. He needed the numbness to go away. The officer stepped back, his head down. You can go, sir. We'll clear the traffic. We'll escort you." Alistair stepped out of the car. The rain was still falling, but the mood of the street had changed. The anger from the crowd was replaced by a sort of solemn anticipation. They parted like a sea, creating a path to his sedan. The sergeant, the man with the silver hair, walked over. He looked tired. He didn't make excuses. He just handed Alistair his keys and his wallet. "We will clear the way," the sergeant said, his voice rough. "Lights and sirens. You won't hit another red light." Alistair took the keys. He looked at the sergeant, then at the younger officer who was standing by the patrol car, looking sick with guilt. "Just don't let this happen to the next guy," Alistair said. It wasn't a speech. It was just the truth. He turned and walked to his car. He slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like rain and fear. He threw his bag onto the passenger seat and started the engine. The roar of the motor sounded like a lifeline. Suddenly, the patrol car ahead of him erupted with light and sound. The siren wailed, a piercing, high-pitched scream that cut through the night. The cars on the street pulled over to the curb, clearing a path. It was the escort he should have had 20 minutes ago. Alistair slammed his foot on the gas. The car surged forward, tires gripping the wet road. He followed the red and blue guiding lights ahead of him, moving faster than he ever had before. The city became a blur. The traffic lights were all green by the time he got to them, the cross-traffic blocked by other police units that had joined the convoy. It was a chaotic race against time. But as he drove, the anger began to bubble up, hot and acidic. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his hands ached. He looked at the clock on the dashboard. It had been 40 minutes since he got the page. 40 minutes. In surgery, 40 minutes was an eternity. He could have built a bypass, repaired a heart, and sewn up a chest in that time. He could have saved that boy 3 times over by now. No, he said out loud, hitting the steering wheel. Focus. Anger is sloppy. Anger kills patience. He forced himself to breathe. He inhaled slowly, counting to 4, then exhaled. He pushed the image of the handcuffs out of his mind. He pushed the fear out of his mind. He replaced them with anatomy. He visualized the boy's chest, the broken ribs, the torn vein. He rehearsed the clamps. He rehearsed the sutures. He needed to be in the zone, that mental place where nothing existed. But the tissue under his fingers, the hospital loomed up ahead, a giant white castle of glass and steel. The bay was a flurry of activity. Security guards were waving them in. The patrol car skidded to a halt at the curb. Alistair slammed on his brakes right behind it. He was out of the car before it even stopped moving completely. He didn't grab his coat. He didn't grab his bag. He just ran. He burst through the sliding glass doors of the ER. The noise hit him a wall of beeping monitors, shouting nurses and crying family members. Usually, this was his domain. He was the captain of the ship here. Tonight, he felt like a drowning man swimming to shore. "Dr. Thorne," a nurse shouted, seeing him sprint past the desk. She looked shocked at his appearance. His shirt was soaked through and ripped at the collar. His wrists were red and bruised. He looked wild-eyed and frantic. "Trauma 1, he yelled, not breaking stride. "Status. He's crashing," she yelled, running to keep up with him. "BP is 40 over palp. Heart rate is 180. He's acidotic. Dr. Evans is doing open cardiac massage." Alistair felt a cold spear go through his heart. Open cardiac massage. That meant they had cut the boy's chest open and were literally squeezing his heart with their hands to keep blood moving. It was a last resort. It meant the boy had essentially died on the table. He shoved open the double doors to the operating room. The room was freezing cold, the way they always were, but Alistair felt hot. The smell of blood and sterilizing fluid was overpowering. There was a team of 10 people around the table working in a synchronized frenzy. Move, Alistair commanded, his voice booming. The team parted like the Red Sea. He looked down at the table. The boy was small, so terribly small. His chest was open, a mass of blood and white gauze. Dr. Evans, a junior surgeon, had his hands inside the chest cavity, rhythmically squeezing the heart. Alistair stepped in, pulling his gloves on with a snap. Evans let go. Show me the injury. Evans stepped back, his gloves covered in bright red blood. It's the IVC, Alistair. It's shredded. I can't get a clamp on it. Every time I try, the tear gets bigger. Alistair leaned in. His world shrank down to a 3-inch space inside that boy's chest. The anger, the police, the rain, it all vanished. There was only the bleeding vein. He saw the ragged edge of the tear. He saw the anatomy. Suction, he said. A nurse instantly placed a suction tube in his hand. Clearing the pool of blood. Clamp, he said. He reached in with his fingers, feeling the pulse of the heartbeat against his gloves. He was navigating blind, trusting his memory of the human body. He slid the clamp around the back of the vein, feeling for the healthy tissue above the injury. Clamp on, he said. Clamp on, the nurse echoed. Is the bleeding stopping? Evans asked, his voice tight. Alistair watched the field. The blood flow slowed to a trickle. The vein was occluded. He had bought them time. We have a flow, Alistair said, his voice steady now. Bypass is up. Let's get him on the pump. But he saw the anesthesiologist shake his head. Doc, his hematocrit is 4. He's too cold. His potassium is off the charts. We can't run the pump. His heart won't take it. Alistair froze. They couldn't use the heart-lung machine because the boy's blood was too diluted, his chemistry too messed up from the massive transfusions. They had to sew the vein up while the heart was beating and while he was bleeding out. It was the hardest surgery in the book, Alistair whispered. We do it fast. Give me the 520 proline. He picked up the tiny needle. His hands were still stiff from the handcuffs. He flexed his fingers again, feeling the tendons protest. He needed steady hands. He closed his eyes for a microsecond, pushing the image of the flashing police lights out of his mind. He thought of the boy's face, a face he had never seen but felt he knew. Stay with me, little man, Alistair whispered. He opened his eyes and began to sew. The room went silent except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was a slow, weak sound. Alistair worked with a speed that bordered on magic. His needle danced in and out of the tissue, closing the tear, rebuilding the wall of the vein. One more stitch, he muttered. Just one more. He tied the knot. He released the clamp. Watch for a leak, he commanded. The blood filled the vein. It swelled up, round and healthy. There was no leak. The repair held. Pressure? Alistair asked. BP is coming up, the anesthesiologist said, a spark of hope in his voice. 60/40. Heart rate is dropping to 150, Alistair let out. A long breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. He stepped back from the table, his shoulders slumping. The adrenaline that had fueled him began to drain away, leaving him feeling hollow and shaky. Close him up, he said to Evans. You've got this. Alistair stripped off his gloves and backed away from the table. He walked toward the door, his legs feeling like jelly. He pushed through the doors into the scrub room, leaving the victory behind him. He leaned against the cold metal sink, gripping the edges with his hands. He looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. He looked like a mess. His eyes were red. There was dirt on his cheek from the street. He slowly turned on the water and washed the blood off his arms, watching the pink liquid swirl down the drain. He had done it. He had repaired the impossible injury. He had saved the boy, but he knew the job wasn't over. He looked at his watch. It was past midnight. It stabilized the vessel, but the boy had been without oxygen for too long. The brain, the kidneys, the other organs, they had taken a hit. The arrest on the street might not have killed the boy directly, but it had put a bullet in the chamber. Now they just had to see if the hammer would fall. Alistair dried his hands on a rough towel. He looked at his wrists again. The bruises were darkening, turning purple. They looked like shackles. They were a reminder that while he could fix the body, he couldn't fix the world. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked out of the scrub room. He had to go talk to the family, and tell them that their son was alive, but the fight was just beginning. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure he was strong enough to be the bearer of that news. Asterisk. The walk to the waiting room was the longest part of the shift. Dr. Alistair Thorne had just spent hours fighting for a little boy's life, navigating a river of blood with a needle and thread, but walking down that quiet beige hallway felt heavier than any surgery. The smell of antiseptic faded, replaced by the faint smell of coffee and fear that always hung in the surgical waiting lounge. His wrists still throbbed under his shirt sleeves, the bruises from the handcuffs a constant stinging reminder of the lost time. He looked at his reflection in a glass cabinet as he passed. He looked exhausted, hollowed out. But he had to be strong now, had to be the one to carry the weight of the night and drop it on a family that didn't deserve it. He pushed through the double doors. The room was crowded. There were grandparents, aunts, uncles, and the parents. The father sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking silently. The mother was staring at a television mounted on the wall, her eyes wide and unblinking. When she saw Alistair, she stood up slowly, clutching her purse like a shield. The rest of the family followed her movement, a wave of hope rising in their eyes. They saw the scrubs. They saw the man who fixed things. They didn't see the broken man. "Dr. Thorne?" the father asked, his voice cracking. Is he out?" Alistair stopped a few feet away from them. He couldn't get too close. He felt like he was contaminated by the injustice of the night, by the failure of a system that was supposed to protect people, not stop them from saving lives. "We finished the surgery," Alistair said quietly. His voice sounded flat in his own ears. "We were able to repair the injury to the vein. The bleeding has stopped. The technical part of the procedure was a success." A soft gasp went through the group. The mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears springing to her eyes. She reached out to take Alistair's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Alistair didn't take her hand. He couldn't. Stood there, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He looked at the father, then back at the mother. He had to deliver the second part now, the part that killed the hope. "Please," he said, his voice trembling. "Please sit down." The relief in the room vanished instantly, replaced by a cold dread. They slowly sat back down, the air leaving the room like a deflated balloon. "The repair was successful," Alistair repeated, forcing the words out. "But the delay. The time it took to get him to the operating room. The amount of blood he lost." He took a deep breath. His brain was without oxygen for too long. When the heart stops, or when the pressure drops that low, the clock starts ticking. We saved his heart, saved his vessel, but the damage to his brain was severe. He hasn't woken up. And the tests show that there is no activity left. He's gone. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a quiet peace. It was a vacuum where sound used to be. The mother stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, trying to process the words. "No activity. He is gone." "What do you mean?" the father shouted, standing up abruptly, knocking his chair over. "You said you fixed him. You said the surgery worked." "The surgery worked," Alistair said, tears burning his own eyes now. "I fixed the pipe. But the water was gone too long. I tried. I got there as fast as I could, but I was delayed." Just then, the sound from the television in the corner of the room got louder. The news had cut to a breaking story. A reporter was standing in the rain, sirens wailing in the background. "Police are reviewing an incident tonight involving a doctor who was arrested while rushing to the hospital," the reporter's voice said. Video has surfaced showing Dr. Alistair Thorne in handcuffs on 5th and Grand. Everyone in the room turned to look at the screen. There it was, the blurry footage shot by a bystander. The blue lights flashing, Alistair being pushed against the car. The arrest. The mother looked from the screen to Alistair. She saw the bruises on his wrists where his sleeves had ridden up slightly. She put the pieces together. The delay. The reason her son lay brain dead in the next room? No, she whispered. She stood up slowly, her face crumpling in rage and grief. No, they stopped you. They stopped you while my baby was dying. I'm so sorry, Alistair said. He didn't make excuses. He didn't defend himself. He just let the guilt wash over him, even though it wasn't his to carry. I tried to tell them. I begged them. The father let out a guttural roar, a sound of pure animal pain, and punched the wall. My son is dead because of a traffic stop, because they couldn't listen. A nurse came into the room, alerted by the noise, but the father waved her away. The family gathered around the mother, who had collapsed to the floor, sobbing into the carpet. It was a chaotic, heartbreaking scene. Alistair stood there, an outsider to their grief, yet the cause of it. He felt like he should leave, but he was frozen. Can we see him? The grandmother asked, her voice trembling but strong. Alistair nodded. Yes, of course. He stepped back, allowing the nurse to lead them away. As the family walked past him, the mother stopped. She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't touch him. She just looked at him with an expression that broke Alistair's heart more than the arrest had. It was a look of confusion. Why did this happen? Why are we here? You did your job, she said softly. But the world failed you, and it failed my boy. She turned and walked away, following the nurse toward the room where her grandson lay, kept alive only by machines that would soon be turned off. Alistair stood alone in the waiting room for a long time. He watched the television. The reporter was still talking. The police chief was issuing a statement, using words like internal review and deeply regrettable incident. They were just words. Bureaucratic noise. They didn't bring back the little boy. Eventually, Alistair turned and walked out of the hospital. The rain had stopped, leaving the city wet and shining under the streetlights. It was peaceful now, mocking the turmoil inside him. He walked to his car. The blue light was still on the dashboard, a useless piece of plastic. He sat in the driver's seat and just stared at the steering wheel. He was free. He was a respected surgeon, but he felt like a prisoner of the night. He knew that tomorrow the news would be full of his face. There would be investigations. There would be apologies from the mayor. Maybe things would change for the next doctor. Maybe the next black man rushing to save a life wouldn't be stopped. He hoped so. He really did. But as he started the engine and drove away from the hospital, leaving the grief-stricken family behind, he knew that for tonight, the world had lost. The system had worked exactly the way it was built to work, and an innocent child had paid the price. And nothing, no apology, no policy change, no protests would ever change the fact that he arrived too late.